It's really quite striking how things happening on opposite sides of the world can be, well, connected. You pull one thread here and something shifts way over there.
Exactly. It's like a web.
Yeah. And today we're doing a deep dive into two spots where things are particularly tense. The US and China, that whole dynamic, and also the situation between Azerbaijan and Armenia.
That's right. We've been looking closely at excerpts from contemporary geopolitical flashpoints and human costs, trying to pull out the core issues, really, understand what's driving these conflicts.
The idea is to give you, our listener, a clearer picture, get the nuances without feeling totally swamped by all the information out there.
A focused look.
Okay, let's kick off with the US and China. The source material paints this picture of, well, a really complex relationship, and right at the top is this big geopolitical rivalry.
It is complex, and you can trace it back, way back. Cold War, obviously. Then Nixon goes to China in '72. Huge deal.
Right, a massive shift. But it didn't really smooth over the fundamental differences, did it? Capitalism versus communism, different systems entirely.
No, not at all. Those underlying tensions, they've just sort of simmered, and they're definitely shaping what's happening now.
And Taiwan seems to be where that tension is most visible. China's claim that's been consistent for decades.
Absolutely. It's central to their perspective. But then the U.S., well, doesn't officially recognize Taiwan's independence, but it sells arms. There's the Taiwan Relations Act from '79.
Right. That act basically commits the U.S. to helping Taiwan defend itself. It's that whole strategic ambiguity thing, isn't it? They won't say exactly what they'd do if China attacked.
Precisely. Keeps everyone guessing. And, the source mentions the Sino-Indian War in '62, where the U.S. backed India. That's part of the history China remembers, too, U.S. involvement in the region.
Fast forward to today, and Taiwan feels like, a real pressure cooker. China's military, especially its navy, has grown massively, biggest in the world by ship count now.
It's a staggering expansion.
And they're much more active in the South China Sea. Then you have the U.S. paying very close attention, and that WSJ report from 2025 talking about serious U.S. prep for potential conflict. It feels like the risk is climbing.
It certainly does. That naval growth isn't just symbolic. It genuinely shifts the balance of power in the Pacific. It forces the U.S. to rethink its timelines in any kind of Taiwan scenario.
Definitely. And layered on top of all that strategy stuff is the economy, trade tensions.
Oh, absolutely. China's economic rise since the 80s has been phenomenal. Unavoidably, that challenges U.S. economic dominance.
Which led us to the trade war in 2018, the big tariffs. That friction is still there.
It is. And it's morphed, hasn't it, into this tech competition, the chip war, the source calls it.
Yeah, the semiconductor restrictions the U.S. put on China, that's not just about phones and laptops, is it? It's about military tech, AI, the future.
It's fundamental.
Yeah.
It's a battleground for who leads technologically, which underpins military strength. And China's not just taking it, they're pouring money into developing their own chips. It's hit companies like Huawei hard, YMTC too.
This whole chip situation, it's really forced both sides to think hard about supply chains, innovation, where their vulnerabilities are.
Exactly. And China hitting back with export controls on critical minerals. That shows it cuts both ways. Global supply chains could get seriously messed up. It's a fight for tech supremacy, pure and simple.
And then there's the ideological dimension, human rights. The source brings up Tiananmen Square back in '89. That framing of China as a communist threat, it still exists in the U.S. narrative.
It does. And the current focus on the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, the U.S. accusations, the sanctions, that adds another layer of friction.
China sees that as interference, right, as trying to hold them back.
Understandably, yes. So you've got these fundamentally different worldviews.
Yeah.
The U.S. free world model versus China's, well, more authoritarian system. It's a deep divide.
And all the while, both sides are upgrading their militaries. China's progress on hypersonic missiles, AI, that's got the CIA apparently saying China's the main threat now, more than Russia even.
Hypersonics are a game changer. They're so fast, so maneuverable, they challenge existing defenses.
Yeah. And the source even mentions some speculation, maybe, ex post suggesting China might want to wait, delay any conflict, build up more strength, while the U.S. might think engaging sooner, maybe indirectly through partners, is better.
That kind of strategic calculation, trying to figure out the opponent's timing and advantage, it's classic great power politics.
Yeah.
A bit chilling, though.
It is. So who's lining up with whom? The source lays out the alliances pretty clearly. For the U.S., it's the familiar faces.
Right. NATO, Japan, Australia, South Korea, shared values play a part. Economic ties are huge, obviously security alliances.
And Japan doubling its defense budget, becoming the world's third biggest spender. That says a lot about the level of worry in the region.
It absolutely does. They want to protect that U.S.-led order, keep trade routes open, push back against China's dominance.
Makes sense. And India leaning towards the U.S.? Well, given their own border issues with China, that's not surprising. U.S. tech and military support would be a big help for them.
Especially considering their rivalry with Pakistan, which is closer to China.
Okay, so China's allies. The source suggests it's more about shared opposition to the U.S.
Seems that way. Russia, definitely. Their opposition to U.S. global influence aligns them, and the Ukraine war has probably pushed them even closer, with China giving Russia an economic lifeline against sanctions.
North Korea, too, heavily reliant on China.
For basic survival, yeah. Economic and military aid. And Pakistan, as you said, sees China as crucial support against India.
Okay, now this is interesting, the hidden truths and misconceptions part of the analysis. The idea that the U.S. has this long-term strategy to contain China, using sanctions, tech limits, maybe even backing proxy conflicts in places like Myanmar or Laos. It's not something usually shouted from the rooftops, but the source suggests it's a real factor.
It probably is. And on China's side, there's this contrast, isn't there? They talk about cooperation, the Belt and Road Initiative.
Right. Win-win cooperation.
But then you look at the military expansion. The actions in different regions, Africa, Latin America, it suggests maybe broader ambitions than just regional influence. Whether it's global dominance, well, that's debatable, but it's certainly expansive.
And the elephant in the room, they're so economically tangled up.
Hugely interdependent. A real conflict would be economically devastating for both and for the whole world.
But the source hints maybe both sides downplay that risk sometimes. For leverage.
Could be. Which leads to misconceptions, like war being inevitable. The source pushes back on that.
Yeah, says diplomacy, economic pressure, deterrence, there's still options.
Right. And the idea that China only wants regional power, again, their global actions seem to contradict that. The better view probably is intense strategic competition, but with huge brakes on it because of the economic ties and the sheer cost of war.
So where are we headed? The source sees the current path as a kind of new Cold War.
Yeah, that feels about right. Trade fights, the chip war, military posturing, Taiwan always simmering. Those are the immediate dangers.
And the future could go badly wrong. Escalation. A mistake over Taiwan, a clash in the South China Sea could spiral fast. Cyber attacks, blockades.
Or the better path, de-escalation. More talks, finding common ground. But those ideological divides make that really, really hard.
And if it does escalate, the global impact. Wow. Supply chains wrecked, economies crashing, potentially drawing in allies. It's grim to think about.
Truly. Which brings us to, how do we avoid it?
Diplomacy seems key. The source stresses direct talks, like Nixon did back in the day. Keep communication lines open, even when it's tense.
Absolutely essential. And maybe finding areas to cooperate economically. Reducing tariffs where possible, joint work on climate tech maybe, to build a bit of trust.
Good idea. And using international bodies, the UN, ASEAN maybe, to mediate the really tricky stuff like Taiwan or the South China Sea disputes.
Worth trying. And crucially, public awareness. Making sure people understand the real costs, human and economic, of conflict. They can put pressure on leaders. Vietnam anti-war movement is a historical example, perhaps.
What if we don't do these things? If inaction wins?
The risks are huge. Miscalculation leading to war, global trade freezing up, millions could die, economic ruin, a world split into hostile camps for decades, global cooperation on anything else. Forget it.
It's sobering, and the source brings it back to people, doesn't it? What people actually want.
Yeah, stability, prosperity, safety. That's pretty universal, whether you're in the US or China. People want decent lives. But nationalism can be whipped up, used to divide.
So how does change happen? Transparency, the source says. Shine a light on hidden agendas.
Education, too. Counter the propaganda with facts about how interconnected we are, the real costs of war.
And people power. Grassroots movements demanding peace.
It's a tall order, but those seem to be the pathways.
Okay, let's shift gears. Azerbaijan and Armenia, another deeply complex situation, but with different roots.
Very different contexts, yes. The source traces this back to the Soviet era, specifically how Nagorno-Karabakh was assigned to Azerbaijan.
Even though it had an Armenian majority population, that decision basically planted the seeds for future conflict, didn't it?
It absolutely did. Putting political lines above ethnic realities, it created this long-term instability, a real ticking time bomb.
And it exploded in 1988 when the Karabakh Armenians asked to join Armenia. That kicked off the First War.
Right, the First Nagorno-Karabakh War, 1988 to 94. Armenian forces took control of the region, but hundreds of thousands of Azerbaijanis were displaced. The 94 ceasefire, well, it just froze the conflict, didn't resolve anything, left Karabakh in Armenian hands, but unrecognized internationally.
And then, in the years after, Azerbaijan got wealthy from oil and gas.
Exactly. And they used that wealth to build up their military significantly, which set the stage for the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War in 2020.
Where Azerbaijan took back a lot of territory.
They did. And that culminated in the 2023 offensive, where they regained full control of Nagorno-Karabakh, which sadly led to over 100,000 Armenians leaving the region, a huge displacement.
So Nagorno-Karabakh itself might be settled, militarily at least, but the tension isn't gone, is it? The source talks about border skirmishes, disputes over other areas.
That's right. The Zangezur corridor is a major sticking point. Azerbaijan wants it, Armenia sees it as a threat to its territory. And Azerbaijan is pushing for full border demarcation, which Armenia is wary of.
And underneath all this territory stuff, there's this deep, bitter ethnic divide.
Decades, even centuries, of animosity, historical massacres, pogroms from the early 20th century, the mutual displacements. It's fueled by propaganda on both sides too, amplifying the hatred.
Plus, the region itself is strategically important. Energy pipelines run nearby, borders with Iran and Turkey, so outside powers get involved.
Always. Looking at the supporters, Turkey is Azerbaijan's main backer. Military help, drones, advisors.
Shared ethnic ties, right. And Turkey wants more influence in the Caucasus, maybe pushing back against Russia.
Seems likely. Plus securing energy routes like the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline. Pakistan supports Azerbaijan too, partly because of its rivalry with India, which is friendlier with Armenia, and Islamic solidarity.
And Israel, selling weapons to Azerbaijan.
Yeah, advanced drones especially, that's largely seen through the lens of Israel's competition with Iran. Azerbaijan is a useful strategic partner for Israel, right on Iran's border, and they get oil from Azerbaijan.
Okay, Armenia's allies. Russia has historically been the main one. Military base there, leader of the CSTO security bloc.
Traditionally, yes, but Russia's influence seems, well, weaker since the 2020 war, probably because they're so focused on Ukraine. Still, Armenia provides a buffer against NATO-aligned Turkey for Russia.
Iran also supports Armenia, interestingly.
Yeah, likely to counterbalance Azerbaijan. Iran worries about Azeri nationalism spilling over into its own large Azeri minority. It's about regional influence, countering Turkey and Israel too.
And India and France.
India sells weapons to Armenia, again, partly thinking about Pakistan and Turkey. France has a large Armenian diaspora, advocates for human rights, so there's diplomatic support there.
So like with the US-China, the source points to hidden truths here too. External manipulation is a big one.
Definitely. These countries being used as proxies. Russia's influence waned. Turkey and Israel stepped up support for Azerbaijan, and that really shifted the power balance. It wasn't just an internal conflict.
And energy politics. Azerbaijan's oil money paid for the military that won the war. Controlling Nagorno-Karabakh helps secure pipelines. That often gets lost in the ethnic narrative.
It does. And the sheer human cost, that displacement of 100,000 Armenians in 2023, maybe got less attention globally because of Ukraine and other crises, but the scale of suffering was immense.
Misconceptions too. Calling it just an ethnic conflict misses the point, right?
It misses the huge geopolitical and economic drivers. Energy, regional influence, external rivalries playing out.
And the idea that peace is impossible. Well, the 94 ceasefire held for a long time, even if it wasn't perfect. Shows mediation can work, though trust is rock bottom right now.
It's a tangled mix. Ethnic hatred, land disputes, geopolitics. That's a really comprehensive approach to solve.
So where does it go from here? The current path seems rocky. Border clashes, Azerbaijan pushing for that corridor, peace talks stalled.
Yeah, lots of mistrust, whether it's Russia or the EU mediating, it's tough going.
Future. Could escalate again. Another war over borders or the corridor, that could really pull in Turkey, Russia, Iran. Big regional mess.
That's the nightmare scenario, the better path. A proper peace treaty. Guarantees for Armenians who might remain or return. Respect for Azerbaijan's territorial integrity.
Yeah.
But getting there, that's a huge challenge.
And another conflict would hit energy supplies, destabilize the region further, could even impact Europe's energy security, raise Russia-NATO tensions.
Definitely wider ripples. So how to avoid it? Stronger international mediation is one thing. EU, UN need to enforce agreements, protect minorities.
Use the 1994 ceasefire as a lesson, maybe? Build on that?
Potentially. Economic incentives could help too. Joint projects, shared infrastructure, something to build interdependence instead of hostility. OSCE proposed things like that before.
And stop the flow of weapons. From Turkey, Israel, India.
Limiting arms sales would certainly help lower the temperature. And then, crucially, reconciliation at the local level. Grassroots dialogue between ordinary Azerbaijanis and Armenians, trying to undo the propaganda, like what happened in Northern Ireland, perhaps.
Because if nothing changes...
More violence seems likely, more displacement, more instability, maybe a bigger proxy war involving the regional powers, and just long-term cycles of hatred and poverty for the people there.
And again, it comes back to people. Azerbaijanis, Armenians, they want the same basic things, right? Security, dignity, a decent life.
Of course. But those desires get twisted, exploited by leaders and external powers. Real change, the source suggests, needs things like truth commissions, facing the past, accountability. South Africa's model, maybe.
Education reform, too. Teaching shared history, neutral curricula.
Crucial for the long term. And economic development joint projects, again, to build mutual benefit, reduce the reliance on outside powers pulling the strings.
You know, looking at both these situations, US, China, and Azerbaijan-Armenia, even though they're so different, you see these common threads, don't you?
You really do. Geopolitical rivalry is huge in both. Economic competition, definitely in US-China, but energy plays a role in the Caucasus too.
Deep historical grievances fueling the conflicts.
Absolutely. And the role of outside countries, stirring the pot or backing sides for their own reasons. And always, the human cost gets overlooked in the big strategic games.
Yeah, it's incredibly complex, messy stuff. But taking the time to unpack it, understand the different angles, the drivers, it feels essential right now with the world being so, well, volatile.
It really is. You can't just look at headlines. You need to dig a bit deeper into the why.
So maybe something for you, the listener, to think about after this deep dive. How much influence do we really have? Can our individual actions or demanding more transparency, more accountability from leaders actually make a difference in these huge geopolitical standoffs?
It's a big question. Can pushing for peace, demanding dialogue, somehow filter up and shift things, contribute to a more stable future?
Something to ponder. We definitely encourage you to keep reading, seek out different perspectives, and keep exploring these critical global issues for yourself.